Wow.
We gotta that was kind of cool, but we gotta do work on transitioning that a little bit better, don't we?
Yeah, it's a little abrupt there at the end.
Gotta learn how to
I was
play
just
that
starting to
on
get
the
into it, and then it's just done.
I know. I
All
felt
right.
like
We got 129 episodes to get some music on this.
That's right. The first concert I remember going to was Kiss, and I just felt like I went back to it.
Tina Turner, 1988.
You want Rick Springfield, 1981.
Whew. Brian, how about you?
Yeah, the Pretenders. It's probably 84.
Yeah. That would have been better.
Nice.
That would have been better.
Good stuff. All right, Tom. Let's get back to the topic at hand.
What are we doing here?
Talking about best concert, favorite concerts.
That's right. So, hey, it's good to have all of us back. Welcome to episode 129. Brian, welcome. Great to have you here. This is the first time that all three of us, I think, have been here at the same time in a while. So this should be fun. But we're going to talk about something today that Carson, do you remember? I don't think we've talked a lot about pricing at all on this show, pricing strategies. And I don't think we have talked really a whole lot about negotiation. And we have some other, I think people would just prefer we talk about our first
let's
concert.
just everybody throw in the comments.
So Bob for the Who and Bob number 2 for the Beach Boys. So yeah, let us know. I like Brian's The Pretenders though. That's the best one.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. But so anyway, before we jump in and talk about pricing and negotiation, again, want to thank Fist Bump for all of their sponsorship and putting all this stuff together, making this all happen. We couldn't do it without them. And I know you said you have a webinar coming up with Mark Hunter. Brandon, don't have all the details yet, but that's coming up in April, right?
Yeah. April 11th, 11 a.m. Eastern. We got that part. I think the registration will be live either tomorrow or Friday, and we'll start promoting it. And Mark and I were just talking right before I came on the show, and he was just telling me, he's like, I tell you what, LinkedIn has even gone better for him. He was just showing me about new revenue he had this month that were people contacting him through LinkedIn because they watch his podcast, they look at his social content, and they're reaching out. And what he was saying is it's like they already know me. Like I'm starting at ground zero with them, but they're already like, hey, I read this from you. I remember this show from you. And they're like already in buying mode. And so he asked if we could do another webinar about that and really, really bring it home for people. Like this LinkedIn thing isn't a nice to have anymore. If you're a leader in 2025 and you are not leading with LinkedIn, you are leaving millions of dollars on the table.
I already have your tagline, Brandon. Mark and Brandon have the 411 for you on 411. I mean, there you go.
There we go. We don't have to worry about the title anymore.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. A Judas Priest, Scott McDonald, Judas Priest, Old Winnipeg Arena.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That would be cool.
My oldest first concert was Journey. So I was trying to raise her right.
Very nice. But my parents told me my first concert was the Jackson 5, but I don't remember it. I think I was too little. So,
what did you go to any when you went back in time to 1955?
Chuck Berry, didn't you see Chuck Berry?
Yeah, his cousin Marvin.
His cousin Marvin, yeah.
Yeah. Let's get on to the show.
Negotiation strategy, shall we?
Brian, you know what happened is the three of us haven't talked in a long time because we haven't been on the show together, and there we get distracted, and now we got a Garth Brooks.
Andrew, I love that. I saw Garth at the show that they recorded double live, one of the shows that they recorded double live at in Nashville. So great show.
Yeah.
So my concert number 2, see, Rick Springfield, I went with my sister. I took my sister. My concert number 2 was The Clash and the English Beat together. That was one of the best, still one of the best I've ever been to. So, all right, enough.
Go ahead. General public opened up for the Pretenders.
Oh, wow. There we go.
So there you go.
Yep. All right. So that wraps up our show today. Thank you for everybody on there.
I'll say this, the most concerts I've ever gone to was Thompson Twins. Anybody remembers them? I think I went to like 4 or 5 of their concerts just because they were at Irvine Amphitheater in California, and why not go to an outdoor concert in the summer?
I've seen Gavin DeGraw 9 times. There you go. I'm a super fan.
Love it.
And
Brian, you had no idea what you were getting into today, did you?
Yeah, Tom, can you rescue us from this?
Yeah, I'm going to try and rescue. So, hey, Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we're going to get into more pricing and negotiation strategies.
Absolutely. Brian Doyle, I'm the president and CEO of Holden Advisors. Started my career as an Air Force pilot. Graduated from the Air Force Academy for my undergrad, flew jets for 10 years. The highlights of that were I commanded 31 combat missions in Kosovo, rescuing and protecting about 1 million refugees that had left Serbia. I also flew the presidential motorcade around the world. When President Clinton traveled, I flew his helicopters and his limos and his Secret Service crew. Left active duty Air Force, went to General Electric, was a master black belt process improvement guy there, and decided that while that was awesome, I felt like I could have a bigger impact on the success of the business moving towards the front. So was an individual contributor in marketing, then a sales leader, then led a marketing group at GE and its offspring. Did a couple of smaller customer experience gigs, and then found my way to Holden Advisors, where we help B2B companies improve their profitability by improving their pricing power. And what I mean by pricing power is helping them set the right price for the value they provide their customers, and then go get that price through better go-to-market and negotiation strategies.
All right. So let's start, I think, with pricing, right? Like I said, Brandon and Carson, I don't know that we've talked about this at all, ever.
Not enough.
If we have, not enough, because I don't recall.
Yeah. So take us through, Brian, because we're going to start with pricing and then we'll go into negotiation. Take us through what you would kind of consider, well, what is a pricing strategy, right? Number one, how would somebody use it? How should somebody go about employing a pricing strategy? And a lot of us say, well, we have our price lists and our discount levels, and that's how we do things. How should we take advantage of that?
Right. So pricing strategy for us starts with your value, understanding and quantifying the value that you provide your customers. And when I think about value in the B2B sense, I'm talking about 3 things. How much do you increase your customers' revenue? How much do you reduce their expenses? And how much do you minimize their risk? And I think about it in those terms, and it is such an incredible lever to pull, because if you think about if you have a business that has 10% margins and you increase your price 10%, you double your profitability. It's that simple. And you could improve, meaning decrease your expenses 10%, however you want to slice that. You could even increase your revenue 10%, and you're not going to touch that 100% increase in profitability. So it's really an important lever to understand.
Carson, Brandon, do you have any specific questions, or should we just continue with Brian's approach?
Keep going, Brian. That was pretty deep for me. Like I'm still thinking through. I've got my CEO hat on, not a sales guy hat on. I'm thinking through that.
Right. So I guess maybe the next logical question is, so how do you do it? Like, do I raise my prices 10%? Do I raise them 20%? Do I not touch them? What happens to my customer base if I raise prices? And so, like I said, it comes down to value. And the way that we think about it is your ability to raise prices or not. We're not going to necessarily advocate for raising prices if you don't deserve it. But it's thinking through the value you provide and can capture with your customer base based on your market, based on your competition. And so you're sort of understanding those dynamics. And we typically start by interviewing the people who work at the company. What do you think your value is? How do you quantify that? What are you hearing from your customers? That's a baseline for us. But really where the rubber meets the road is we go talk to customers. And it's so remarkable. A lot of times we'll start a project and people will say, I don't know if our customers are really going to be open with you. And I'll tell you, when you ask the right questions and you listen, man, it's like being somebody's therapist or bartender. They will open up and they will share, this is what your client does really well and what we totally appreciate. These are the things that they don't do so well. Oh man, if they added this service, it would make a huge difference to us. And we get underneath the covers of how their customers really benefit from the value that they're providing. And that enables us to do the math and say, with this customer base in this segment, you have a tremendous opportunity. Maybe over here with these other set of customers, you don't. Leave the prices where they are. And we've seen that play out, hundreds of times. One story that I love is we had a client that provided HR services to Fortune, call it 100 companies. And we spoke with their customers, and there was a tremendous amount of value that they were providing, and they were grossly undercharging for it. And so we came back, did the math, helped them understand and articulate that value, and gave them a path to a 50% price increase, which resulted in $80 million of increased revenue.
Wow.
And here's the kicker. They didn't lose a single customer. It wasn't a straight path from here to there, but in the end, they didn't lose a single customer.
So what I'd love to understand, and Brian, I love this, zeroing in on how you frame up that customer conversation, because I think that's super impactful and powerful. I would agree with you. I think a lot of times my experience has been as a seller or as a leader, but I would agree with you that if you approach it the right way, in a sense of how can I add value as a collaborator or as a partner or as a vendor, but also I want to make sure I'm meeting you where you are, de-risking your decisions, understanding your budget, understanding if there's value that I can add here. Customers will engage in that conversation with you.
Mm-hmm.
They'll share with me how much their budgets are, how much they're spending in competing solutions and things of that stature. And if there are areas where I can add value or consolidate costs or replace different solutions, I've found success in doing that. But knowing you're not going to win every single time out of the gate, but at least having an open, candid conversation is exceptionally helpful in helping you set price and ultimately negotiate wherever you need. But I'd love to know more about how do you frame that conversation up with customers? Because I would think you're adding immense value for them. I'd love to hear how you set that up and go into those conversations with customers to help define price.
Right. Carson, are you asking how we work with our clients or how we interview their customers?
Both, I think, would be valuable. But
Okay.
I think at the end of the day, like if you're talking to your client and you're guiding them on how to go out and have that exploratory price conversation, how do you suggest somebody frames that up?
So I would start with number one, timing matters. And so in the research that we've done, if you are early in what we would call the buyer's decision cycle, they are way more open to talking about value. So this is discovery, qualify, whatever your sales stage is that you call those stages. That's when to have these conversations. If you wait until the RFP comes out and then you say, oh, let me ask you these really insightful questions, it's too late. And you're too far down the path. So number one, that matters. And in some instances, our clients, how to have a better QBR, a better quarterly business review to get to some of these things after you've sold and you're coming back around. I mean, that can be super powerful. In terms of the mechanics of either really how we would teach them to do it or how we would do it ourselves, is you start with an interview guide. So what are the questions that you want to ask? What do you want to uncover? Who do you want to talk to? And the term guide here is super important because it's not a script. You're not, if somebody says something really insightful that's a little off topic, go down the path, have that conversation with them and understand why they believe what they believe. And if you don't hit some of these other aspects, it's totally okay. So you get down there and you have this in-depth interview of understanding what they care about, what they don't care about. And you start to nibble away at quantifying that value because ultimately that's what you're going to tie your price to. And just to take this one step further, what's really critical when we quantify value is for it to be in the customer's language. So they have given you these numbers. You can show up and say, you make this much per unit. I'm going to increase your units by 50%. Therefore, you will make this much, and I'm going to take half of it. Sometimes that works, but more often than not, you have a conversation where the customer is volunteering. Geez, if you guys did that really well, I'd grow like 20%. And you give them the Columbo, like 20%. Did you just tell me 20%? Oh my God. And how much do you make on each of those units? Well, you make $100 and we're up 20%. I can't even, that math is too complicated for me. What is that math? They're giving you the math, and then all you're doing is repeating back what your customer has told you. You're not forcing it on them.
Hey, Brian, I think about a lot of the pricing discussions I've had over my career with companies and salespeople, and a lot of times is, hey, we want to be competitive or maybe a little bit lower. Our pricing is based on competitor pricing, and what we perceive, right, is what the tolerance level of that customer might be for pricing based on what we do and what the competitors do. How do you handle that pushback? Because I assume you must get some pushback when you start this is like, well, wait a minute, we can't raise our prices. Competitor A is already 10% lower than us and so forth. How do you handle that pushback that you would likely get? And then I guess second question is, do you get bias at all when you're interviewing the company's customers after the fact and they're telling you the value? Do you think there's any bias in that, or do you take that into account when you're doing the interview? Bias that they're already existing customer.
So let me answer the second one first. We're going to talk to lost customers as well. Okay. So that's where that bias is removed. We're going to have those harder conversations, and that's where a third party often helps quite a bit, because the customer may not be willing to say, salesperson, the reason I didn't buy from you is because you're totally uneducated and you pushed me in a direction I didn't want to go. They're not going to have that hard conversation. They might have that hard conversation with us. So we're going to be able to learn from customers and from customers who don't exist. In terms of the first question that you asked, and can you remind me what that was real quick?
Yeah, I mean, do you get pushback, saying, hey, we can't raise our prices. We have to stay competitive, right? We're already higher than our competitors, that kind of stuff.
For sure. So my first question back is, where did you get that information? And typically it's one of two sources. It's my customer told me, or my salesperson told me that the prices are lower. You want to talk about bias? I mean, the customer has no interest in telling you, actually, you're the cheapest one of everybody. You might want to consider raising your prices. They're never going to do that, particularly as you get into like sourcing or procurement or whatever you want to call it, that official buyer. So that's number one. Number two is sort of the same thing. Hey, why did you lose the deal, Mr. and Mrs. Salesperson? Really unlikely the salesperson's going to say, I had a tough time articulating our value. I didn't follow up the way I should. All things that maybe a salesperson falls down on. What they're typically going to say is, we got outbid. We had a higher price. And so maybe you got a higher price. And if you got a higher price and you are a premium brand, Let's talk about how to articulate your value and how to justify that higher price. So that's what I'm going to say to my client. You want to be the low cost provider. Typically, you're not talking to me in the first place because you're going to be the person who's just in the race to the bottom, and you don't need somebody to help you with pricing because you're just going to undercut whoever the other person is.
What about pricing something new? Something new to the market, new service, new offering. These can be challenging, and I think often they will, because to some of the points that are being made in the comments too. You definitely don't want to underprice. You don't want to overprice, but you kind of want to litmus test the market a little bit. How do you suggest approaching those types of scenarios, Brian?
I think there's a couple different versions of that. If it's completely brand new and nobody's ever heard of it, there may be opportunities to start with a lower price, get your foothold in the market. Maybe you have a beta version of something and you're learning from your customers. And that is a set expectation of, I'm going to give you a lower price because you're helping co-develop this with me. And then after 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is, we're going to go to a higher price. And there's that agreement up front. If it's something that it's new to you, but exists in the market, you can still use that market and customer research to understand where the price point should be.
Do you recommend, I'm in the tech world, I have a tech company, and there's always a lot of debate. Should we be publishing our pricing on a website, or should you have, call for pricing? Do you have any recommendations for that? Do you think it's a good idea to publish pricing, or a better idea, and again, B2B, more enterprise-ish software scenario?
So if it's B2B and it's enterprise and it's bigger customers, I would not post it on your website. I would go have those conversations because you want to be able to distinguish your apple from their orange, so to speak. And if you've just got somebody who's, the most junior person in the organization and looking at websites, they're like, Tom's like, he's way higher. We shouldn't go with those guys.
Right.
And they don't understand that you're twice as good as somebody else, or they looked at a lot of times we think in terms of good, better, best. They're looking at your best and comparing it to somebody else's good. You want to be in that conversation versus them just, taking what they think is the right number from your website.
That's an exceptionally valuable point, Brian.
Yes.
Because I see that very frequently where we get thrown a random or randomized quote that a competitor has, or a price that they have with a competitor. And, they may be doing their own research, but they're doing it in a way that is giving them minimal information back. And it's not comparing apples to apples. And if you have published prices, it leaves them to their own devices. They may arrive at a conclusion that's not going to be accurate. And I think that actually bleeds in very well to Catherine's question, how do we justify a quote unquote high price? I'd love to spend a moment on that. I think one of the key areas, and Brian, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is, especially as you're, maybe coaching organizations that have set what they've been told is maybe a high price. There's so many ways to build value. There's going to be justification that's baked in, not only from what we're seeing in the market, what we're seeing in the industry, but frankly, the unique differentiators that are baked into that price. Again, I think it's getting to that differentiation of saying this isn't apples to apples comparison, because you may deem this as a high price because you're comparing it to this price out here in the market. But the reality is our offering has this and this and this that nobody else has, or you're getting these additional resources, or, we are building in these additional investments that we're making that you're not getting or seeing over here. I think that makes it all the more important that we're really anchoring on what are you actually getting for this price. And again, these things can set the stage for the negotiation, because, if you've got a good, better, best scenario, ultimately you may really try to cost justify that good and, pointing toward the good, which might require more change on the customer's part, more risk on the customer's part, or whatever it is. But you also want to leave yourself a threshold where your margins, if you want to adjust things, and you also know if you want to conceivably trade down to one of these other offers. So, I'd love to get your thoughts Brian, on that element is, how do we approach that justification side of things?
Well, you said something really important there, Carson, when you were talking about good, better, best, and you started talking about what the customer wants. And that's super important because there are some customers who are going to want the premium, the best, and some customers who are going to want the good. And so it's our job as salespeople to go be having those conversations and understanding that maybe they're going to be super happy with the good. Maybe they don't have the budget this year and next year they want to go to the best, but this year they just want the good. So let's offer them the good. And so we have apples to apples comparison. So number one there. So I think you're right on with that. Another aspect of this is that our customers often teach our salespeople their value. And they, a common phrase is, you're just a commodity. It doesn't matter what you're offering, you're just a commodity. And we had a client that was a commodity, like no kidding. It was a group that ran quarries. So what they were selling was dirt. It wasn't special dirt, it was just dirt. So you want to talk about commodity, that was it. And they were in number 3 position. They were sort of losing out on the market. They had conversations with their customers. And in this case, it wasn't, I definitely want the good. It was, I want the better and the best. And how that manifested itself was their customers told them, I'm losing a ton of money with these dump trucks sitting in line. I'm like, really? Like, how long are they sitting in line? Well, typically it's like 45 minutes. Whoa. And so what's that costing you? Well, I got these construction sites where people are sitting around idle because they don't have the dirt to move around. And I'm paying all those people for nothing. So it's costing me whatever it was costing me an hour. And they said, what if we made TSA pre-check, basically gave you the fast lane, and you guys could get out of line and just go through? And they're like, we'd pay for that. Okay, so now we're not selling the commodity, the dirt. We're selling the service of how to get dirt in the truck and outside the quarry as fast as possible. That conversation just changed.
You know what I like about our show? Yeah. We give you the real dirt.
Yeah. And
right,
we
Brian,
give you we give you really, really bad puns too.
Yeah.
So that I had a question before that, Brian, and I've been chewing on this. I've been kind of quiet today, but this has really got me thinking. But I may have just answered my own question by the example you just gave. But my question was going to be, because this seems like what you do, it's you're starting to get the brand involved. You're getting your messaging involved. I mean, everything's kind of coming to this when you start talking about pricing, like the example you just gave. It wasn't really a pricing conversation. Pricing happened to be an outcome from it, but it became a service need conversation, right? And that would have affected the brand messaging. If there was a lot of other companies out there whose dump trucks were sitting around waiting, and therefore there were entire crews of people waiting, and you're like, hey, I've got 15 people times an hour that is lost every day because of this. Like you really just change the entire brand messaging, positioning, everything, and the price gets changed too. When does a company know that they should be looking at their pricing? Like, or is there some companies that are they're more ready for this than they realize? Or is it just pretty much every company, this is just SOP that they should be doing?
In general, I would say that you should be looking at your pricing routinely, because think about all that's going on in the world right now, and it has been for the last 5 years. There are so many changes. If you haven't been looking at your pricing through inflation, if you haven't been looking through your pricing through what now tariffs, your competition has changed. In all likelihood, your product, or at least your competitors' products, have changed. Mm-hmm. So you really ought to be looking at this. And where a lot of folks come to us is not like, it's been exactly 9 months since I've changed my price, can you help us? It's more of this gut feel of, I think I'm leaving money on the table. And I don't know if I am or not, but I just got this feeling like I don't know how much I should price. I don't know where I should set my price. I don't know if I could actually even go get it if I raise my price. I don't know if I'd lose customers. Like, I just don't know. If you've got a feeling like that, it's time to take a look. And frankly, if you don't have a feeling like that every 6 to 9 months, you should check your gut.
I mean, your cost of goods sold is inevitably increasing. And on top of that, we are continuing as organizations to add additional value into what's being offered. And we've got to look at ways that we differentiate from our competition. I couldn't agree more, Brian. I think, what are some other factors? John's got a great question in the chat. To what extent is the right price a combination of an objective and subjective assessment of the situation? What are the factors that we should be looking at additionally as we kind of think about reevaluating our pricing?
So if I had to pick three and sort of triangulate on these three things that go into your pricing, number one is your value. What value are you providing to folks? Number two is your market. So what are they used to paying? What is your competition doing? And then your floor is cost. Now, I am not advocating cost plus. That's probably the number one reason somebody brings us in is like, we do cost plus 10%, and I think we could do better. Yes, you totally can. So I'm not advocating that. But if for some reason you are losing money on deals because it takes you more money to produce whatever you're doing than you're getting for it, well, either stop doing that or stop doing that with those customers. Like if you have a segment of customers for whatever reason who just can't afford you or are super expensive because they're laborious, then go have that conversation about, I either got to raise price or we have to part ways.
All right. I still have
I was in note-taking mode. I got CEO hat on, and I'm taking a bunch of notes. Thank you, Brian.
Happy to help.
Yeah, I have a lot more questions on this, but I think we need to get into the second part here, which is more of the negotiation aspect of it. And I think, as you said, right?
Before we go there, Tom, can I ask this, Brian? I am curious. Can you get into some of the detail when you're having conversations with your customers? What's the strategy there? Like, how do you go about doing that? Because obviously, if you go to them and say, "Hey, we're thinking of raising our prices by 20%. What do you think?" You're not going to get a good answer, right?
No.
How do you like? There's got to be a genius involved with how you ask those types of questions to get real good answers, especially the first example you gave, that they were able to raise their prices by 50% and didn't lose a single client. You must have crafted those conversations and asked those questions in a really, really strategic and good way for them to give you that type of response. So I'm really curious, how do you go about leading those conversations and asking questions?
The short answer is it's based around value. We want to make sure that you're getting the value that you deserve. We want to make sure that we're supplying value where it matters most. We want to understand if there's new products or services that we can deliver that would help you reap even greater value around this. Again, increased revenue, decreased costs, minimize risk. That's how the conversation plays out. Brandon, you're exactly right. You can't say, we're thinking about raising prices. What would you pay? Super unlikely. There are opportunities for us to do a blind, or in some cases double blind conversation, where we would go through a third-party provider to us, who you guys are probably all participating in these. Hey, we'll give you $300 if you participate in an hour-long conversation, and they are somebody in the industry who is talking to us about, or previous from the industry, not breaking any laws, where they say, this is generally where the market is. This is what we're seeing. This is what people pay. This is what's delivered. This is what's missing. And so we can get some information from those folks as well, if we're outside of that customer, either won or lost group that we were talking about before.
I wanted to hit, it says LinkedIn user, so I'm not sure who this came from, but there was a question, and this tied into a comment I think Bob had made earlier. is, how do you proactively have that discussion of value when customers may need it, but they haven't really discovered that they really want it, right? The need is more objective and the want is more subjective or more emotional.
So I will say, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this as well, that if you are trying to teach somebody that they need your product and then getting them to buy your product, that's super hard. That's a really long sales cycle. So that's a tough sell. What I would advocate here when it comes to like really understanding what they should need, there's a few elements here. Number one is do your homework. 10 years ago when as salespeople, we used to ask like, hey, Brandon, what keeps you up at night? That time is gone. If you are asking that question, you're just run and leave or hang up the phone.
I need to take that out of my playbook. Thanks.
Take that out of your playbook.
Brian, I think it has to do with age and brain chemistry, and I just don't sleep as well at night. And usually the middle of the night restroom break wakes me up. Just answer your question.
Yes, enlarged prostate, whatever you got going on there.
A dog or a kid coming in and
it's not that. You have this new thing called the internet. You got an even newer thing called ChatGPT or whatever. You need to be doing your homework. You need to be showing up with this is what should be bothering you. This is what your competition is doing. That is one way to go at it. Another way to go at it is, and this works with senior executives, which is really what I advocate for, not your middle manager person, is look at what they're talking about. So, you've got the CEOs giving speeches. They're putting things in their earnings report. They're putting things on their website. And I have a client that provides, it's like anti-money laundering and know your customer, those sort of risk mitigation things. So if you look at one of their customers is a big bank, and the big bank is in the last 6 months, man, there's like press release after press release about how they are helping consumers avoid this risk and this anti-money laundering and this fraud and all that. Okay, so if they're not buying fraud from you, anti-fraud services, you need to be and you provide those. You need to go have those conversations. And the sweet spot here is the intersection of what will make the biggest impact for your customer's business and what you do well. So you obviously don't want to introduce something that you're not very good at. And by the same token, you don't want to push something that you're great at, but is not going to move the needle at your customer very much. So it's that sort of, if you think of 2x2, it's sort of that upper right quadrant of what you're seeking. And when you talk in those terms, you elevate the conversations from the middle manager who wants quote unquote value adds, which is like, will you pay for my Christmas party, to senior level people who are like, yeah, I know Johnny doesn't have budget for this. I've got budget. Whether I put it in the budget or not, I have money to spend, and you sound like you know what you're talking about, and I need the help you provide.
I keep saying this, so I have one last quick question on pricing.
And
do you see that one of the biggest areas of undervalue is service levels that companies are providing compared to maybe just their product themselves, but really undervaluing the service level that they're and the value that provides to the customer itself?
We have to get folks out of talking about features and benefits and into impact and value. Service fits in that impact and value. Bringing disparate things together comes into that impact and value. Gosh, sometimes it's even like, I'll hold the inventory at my place and deliver it just in time to your place.
Right.
That's value. So the quick answer is, for sure, it's not the features. That's what poor people do.
I'm seeing, at least in my industry, I'm seeing every day a larger and larger appreciation for the service level and the support, and way more so, and that having more impact and value on their decision than the features and benefits. So,
yeah.
All right, let's move over to negotiation. So kind of take us through we've worked on our pricing strategy. How can we improve our negotiation strategy?
Number one is recognizing that you are walking into a game. So you may have these great value conversations with the business decision maker, and somewhere around that proposal time frame, another set of people is going to take over. And typically they're called procurement. They could be sourcing. They could be professional buyers, consultants, whatever. They show up and they try to change the game on you. And they use techniques. We have a list of our top 10 techniques, which I will be offering here at the end of the program for anybody who's interested. But there is a playbook that they have mastered, and they are going to take over these conversations and try to get you to discount from that very thoughtful price that you just established with your value-based pricing strategy. What we believe is that there's 4 buyer types. There's no kidding a price buyer, and our research has shown that really it's like 10 to 15% of all B2B buyers are price buyers, no more than that. Number 2 are value buyers. They understand what they're buying. They've done all the math. They get it. Relationship buyers, where they want you to hold their hand through this process, maybe won't even do an RFP. And then there's the 4th kind, and we call them the poker players. And they are value or relationship buyers who are pretending to be a price buyer.
And so that's their bluff, right? They're bluffing as the price buyer.
That's right. So they are pretending they're the price buyer, and they're giving you these techniques. And I for the sake of time, I won't give you I won't walk through all 10, but they are things like good cop, bad cop. So one day they're going to yell at you. One day they're going to be nice to you. Sometimes it's different people. Sometimes it's the same person. They're going to use what we call should cost modeling. So they're going to dissect. I'm sure people on the call today are going to totally get this. They're going to look at everything you provide, and they're going to say, okay, I want a little bit of this. I want a little bit of that. Now, how much does steel cost? Okay, I'll take a little bit of that. And how much does this? And they say, your product should cost $1,000 a unit. And we know you have to put that up 10%. So we're going to pay $110. It should cost this. They'll do multiple RFP rounds. And I swear, I heard this last week. Guy said on one of our deals, I'm going to need you to sharpen your pencil.
Yeah.
Like, seriously, you're still using that phrase.
Still say that?
I need you to sharpen your pencil. I'm like,
actually,
well,
I heard that about 2 years ago, I think, for the last time. Yeah.
I heard it last week. I'm not kidding you.
Wow.
It was in an email. I need you to sharpen your pencil. And what's happening here is when they put you through that second or third round of the RFP, I've been on the other side of this. There might not be any competition. And you are lowering your price against yourself. And they're just like, this is awesome. Dude, I'm going to get promoted out of this. I just sit here and watch the guy lower his price.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times these guys are getting paid specifically to bring your costs down. The win in it for them is to get you to go bottom dollar. And like, man, Brian, I love this so much. What I'd love to hear from you is, as you're thinking about getting ready for the negotiation, like, what are some of the blind spots that we should be looking for? I mean, I've had so many things that have snuck their way in. Like there's this hidden second legal review type of thing. I mean, going into these things, we need to know their exact process. Like who's going to sign this? Who are all the stakeholders that have some kind of say in it? Because the last thing you want is you're selling to this person, and then lo and behold, it turns out now they've got to go sell it over here, and you're leaning on this person to do your job for you. It's like, I need to know everybody that's going to lean in on this. I need to know your exact process, your timeline, what's in it for you, what risk do you foresee? But the bottom line is, yes, the styles are very, very real, and you can't be intimidated by how some of these folks can treat you in the midst of the negotiation. Like you can't take it personal. You can't be reactionary as a result of somebody coming at you or telling you like you're going to have to sharpen your pencil as an example.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you have to do anything. Like every time, and you should never say we're going to do that, or you should never say like I'm giving you best and final pricing and then go back and then come back and undermine yourself. Like there's
Right.
so many landmines that you could step on. What would you say are the biggest things as you prepare for a big negotiation that you need to be looking out for and that you need to know?
So internally, you have to just take the emotion out of it. You know that you're going to be in a battle. Even if you do everything you just said, Carson, I know everybody's involved in this. There's a pretty good chance that somebody lies to you. I hate to break it, but they go, "Oh yeah, it's not just the two of us." And
or the deal isn't going to happen. I mean, I literally had a guy say on the last day of the year, "I don't think this is going to happen unless you can find me another $120,000," and I just said flat out, "I can't."
Yeah,
and the deal still got done.
But I have a question on that, Brian and Carson. Isn't that the whole game, right? Is I can pull the rug out at any point in time and no deal. And maybe Brian, is that really ever or I'm sure it's sometimes the case, but is it more seldom the situation where they're really going to walk away from the purchase?
Yeah. So let me tell you, I was just listening to a podcast not long ago of two procurement guys talking to each other. It was 4 procurement people. And they said, all right, so if somebody's coming to us and they said, it's a combination of inflation and tariffs and they got to raise the price. So what do we do? And the guy's like, oh, well, number one, you tell them you don't have the budget and they can't do it. And then the other guy says, what if you really need them? What if they're a strategic supplier? Like, now what do I do? And the guy's like, yeah, okay. So first of all, you delay. Then you make them prove it. They got to come in with, and then the guy went through basically like 7 of the top 10 tactics where he's saying all this stuff. Oh, then after that, man, I'd go quiet for like 2 months. And the point of this is that the playing field is far more level than you as a seller are led to believe. They need you. And if you are an existing supplier, think about switching costs. Some of these things to rip you out of their systems are so expensive that even if the other person was 10 or 20% cheaper, it wouldn't be worth going away from you. So you got to come in with that mindset. You got to know what you're about to be up against. And then Carson, to answer your question of like, okay, who's like, what's the number one failure here? It's filling the silence. So procurement will ghost you. They will stop replying to emails. That's sort of the long-term silence where you're like, crap, it's been 2 weeks. Like, well, what if I did this? Well, what if I did that? And they're like, wow, I was just about to cave and the guy just gave me a deal. I'm just going to be quiet longer and see what happens. So there's that in sort of a 1 to 2 week, 3 week time frame. But there's also on calls. I mean, literally, you're talking to them and they go, Tom, this is never going to happen. I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
And you wait. I mean, you just said, yeah. That was like 3 seconds. And you said, yeah, because it was getting uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable. People watching on LinkedIn were uncomfortable. They're like, damn, did it freeze? Right? 3 seconds is forever. Man, you got to get used to like 10 seconds. And somebody's going to fill that gap. And if it's not you, it's to your advantage.
I think some things that you said, Brian, that are super important in all this. You've got to understand the playing field. You've got to understand the people, and you've got to do the best that you can to figure out what looks like a win to everybody that will talk to you in these situations. And, there have been times where, and I write about this in my book, The Show Must Go On. There are times when I have been blocked or railroaded by procurement, and the risk to me was if I don't do something drastic, I mean, these folks are going to nail me down. I'm going to the senior leaders and I'm going to express to them the risk that I see to their organization if they go down this path. The conversations that ensued were very, very uncomfortable, but we got the deal done. Furthermore, times where like there's also a lot to be said for if you can find those internal stakeholders that want to see this deal happen, and they're kind of like that friendly, and they'll whisper in your ear like the little, the murmurings. And you can't trust all of anything, but you
Yeah.
can absolutely like, okay, I'm hearing they want this deal to happen, but if you do this, like it'll really help the deal. Okay, great. And you've got to really be able to build momentum and underscore this is the value that I built up to this point. One of the most critical deals that I ever got done, that literally the last day, the guy said, I don't think this is going to happen unless you drop another, $100,000+ off this deal. And I literally said, like, I've got line of sight. I did open up some opportunities to have line of sight to some additional potential investment if they sign the deal, but I was not dropping my price any further. I just wasn't. And what happened in all of that is being able to reiterate, you're saying that I need to do these things, or that you think that at this stage, if I don't drop this, it's going to go to the board. Why in the world didn't that come up before? I mean, I even asked about that. So that's why it's so important to do your due diligence up to this point to really know their process, because I was able to say, at no time did you ever tell me that there was a threshold. I asked you about that. So, if it can't happen because of that, then it can't happen. You've got to be able to stand firm on these points, but you also have to be able to reiterate some of the value that you brought up to this point. Ideally, there's been some great skin in the game by both parties. They've invested a lot going into this deal. So for them to like make it go kaput, don't get me wrong, like the pressure I'm getting from leadership to close this deal, and they're telling me, just go ahead and drop the price. No, like I'm close to this. I know what I've done up to this point. I know the skin in the game that the customer has. And if you know what their stakeholders value in this deal, and if you know what looks like risk to them, if they don't do the deal, then you're operating kind of being able to see some of their cards, wouldn't you say?
I think that's right. And I love what you said about getting to senior leaders. So not just, like, well, they gave me a spreadsheet to fill in as part of the RFP, so I have to color within the lines. Like, no, you don't. So number one, I think that's a good idea. And then the other element here that I think is a lot of our clients have had a ton of success with, that you're I think you probably did prior to that ultimatum, which is what we would call give gets. Yeah. And those are options and trade-offs. We talked about good, better, best earlier in the call. It's those sorts of things where if they say, look, we're not going to close this deal unless you cut 120 grand. You go, here's what we could do. You ask for the best, and we can do 120 grand, and that looks like the good. And so here's what you're trading off. You're substituting 24/7 customer experience for 9 to 5. And you're, whatever the industry is, you're going to hold all the inventory on your site, not at our site. We'll deliver once every 3 months, whatever it is. And it forces them to make some of those choices. And you can learn as part of that process, but it also is not you caving and discounting. It's you keeping price and value aligned so that you're still cool with the profitability that you've got by virtue of that sale. You're just moving both down in parallel.
Something else I would add to this, and like even being able to work with procurement folks, like getting to know what matters to them and what looks like a win to them is so valuable, because if I'm working with someone and I understand what matters most to them, but I can also be very transparent and very communicative about, look, I work for an organization that reports their numbers quarterly to Wall Street. This is how, if you purchase in this way, or you purchase this particular SKU, or if you tell me where you need to be from a budgetary perspective, and I can get you there, but I can do it in a way that it makes my leadership happy, my company happy, gets my team paid. These things matter to my organization. I can pull these strategic levers in a way that benefits you and might bring down your costs a little bit, but it also benefits my team greatly. Let's meet in the middle. Like, let's put our cards on the table to a degree to explain what really matters the most to each other. If you're telling me budget is the number one factor, okay. Or if you're telling me that the risk factor, or you don't want to hit a certain threshold because it goes to the board, or, whatever these variables are, my biggest advice in the negotiation is know all the people and know all the variables as early as possible. Brian, it goes back to what you said at the beginning. Timing is everything. You've got to understand the timing, the milestones. You can have all the time in the world between today and the end of your year. But I mean, sometimes these deals can take every single second of them because of all the back and forth and posturing. It's critical to know who's touching this deal and what are the variables that matter. And I have benefited a great deal by being very transparent about what my team and my company will care about. And I will also tell them that you need to consider me your advocate and your evangelist, because I'm going to take everything that you tell me and I'm going to go back and the most important selling I do is internal selling. I've got to sell my leadership on unlocking the resources, discounting, investment, etc. I've had my CVPs that have told the customer point blank, you need to work with Carson. And that's sometimes the best value that they can add as well, is putting you as a seller in a position to win. Because if they do that, then they know that they can't just go over my head because they didn't get the answer that they wanted. So making sure your leadership is aligned, especially on very significant strategic deals, is critical, because you don't want to set up the customer for any additional opportunity to like go back on something, go over your head, keep trying to squeeze more out of you. You've got to control the narrative.
Right. And one thing I'd like to double down on is, a lot of times when we start an engagement, we start with an executive workshop, just get everybody in the room. And it's something typically even I as CEO might lead, where it's we start off with like, what is your pricing purpose? Are you trying to get profitability, revenue, market share? There's like 15 executives in the room, and everybody's got a different vote. It's like, well, why don't we start there? And when you can get that alignment, then you don't run into as many problems when you're negotiating and then it runs up the flagpole and they're like, just close the deal. And you're like, okay, thanks for undermining me. So that's super important. And then just to give an example of, like you're saying, like, hey, I can do this, but I can't do that. We had a manufacturing client that was selling into somebody who took their part and put it with a whole bunch of other parts to create this vehicle. And they could do certain things, certain concessions on the OEM side that was okay for our client, but they wanted to really make the profit on the aftermarket. And so you can give the buyers those sorts of choices. And it also gives them, when they're filling out their performance appraisal at the end of the year, they can say like, oh yeah, I got the OEM price down 2%, saved the company this much. They don't add the paragraph where they said, oh yeah, and by the way, the aftermarket went up 12%. So net for our client was, +8. They don't put that in, but they get to feel good. We get to feel good. Our client is making more money. That's the whole point.
Hey, Brian, and there's some great questions here in the chat that unfortunately, we're not going to really get a chance to hit on. Brian warned me before we came on that we have way too much to cover in the time that we, but the one topic that we were going to talk about next, and I just want to hit on it briefly, and then Brian, maybe you can come back and join us again, because I think there's a lot more we could unpack here, is this generational buyer, right? The different generations of buyers, whether millennials or Gen Z, Gen X, baby boomer, and navigating how you work with these different generations, knowing that we're kind of short on time. Do you have any kind of quick hits, Brian, or quick tips and tricks on dealing with some of the different generations of buyers? And then maybe later, another episode, we can do a deeper dive on this.
Yeah, let's do it. So I didn't understand this before, and did a bunch of research, talked to a bunch of smart people, ended up compiling that and writing a book, which is over my shoulder here, called Gray Goldfish. That's on Amazon if you're interested. But it's how to lead and communicate with different generations, and selling is part of that communication. And so, Tom, to answer the short, give you the short version, absolutely, they are different in how they approach things. And if you think about baby boomers, who would, generally on the older end of folks who are in business right now, there's an element of formality, an element of respect, respecting all that got them to this point in their lives and their careers, and the work you're doing to get to those results. So show them you aren't cutting corners. And then to flip to the younger end of the spectrum, if you wanted to pick millennials, and we have Gen Z now as well in the workforce, it's more of a collaborative approach. If you think about how, depending on the age here of the panel and the folks watching, if you've got kids in school right now, they do a ton of group projects. They don't do a lot of projects by themselves. It's all these team projects. And so if you're working with millennials, they're used to that. And if you can be part of their team and help them co-create and help them come up with the solution that they're trying to mold and sort of shepherd them through this process, even their own procurement process, that can be super powerful. And we have examples of, it starts with a sales strategy and negotiation project for us, and it turns into, how should I share this with the board? How do I motivate my own team? How do I talk internally about this stuff with that younger generation that might appreciate that a little bit more?
Interesting.
I'm for next time, but I'm curious about that too. And I find with the companies that I sell to are, 10 to 60, 70 million in revenue. So not as sophisticated. I tend to find it's more personality type that I need to be more concerned with than age when it comes to negotiation. Like I need to really start to discover as quick as I can, who is this person and what do they really need and want to make a positive decision versus some real more formal process. And I don't think age influences that as much, or at least that's my opinion. Can you speak to that at all on like more the personality disc profile, something like that?
So without a doubt, I think those buyer types are the key to this. I think generational differences in how you communicate with folks can be an overlay to it. So I'm not suggesting, hey, they're a baby boomer, so this is what you say to get them on your side. It really is their buyer type, how they think about value, those different things. The most of what we've talked about today. The reason I bring up or answer the generational question the way I do is there are differences in just how they approach that communication. There may be folks that, a lot of this is just, how do I get in contact with my customer? And some folks, you're going to have a much better chance of texting and getting them to have that quick interaction where you learn a ton. Whereas somebody else is like, texting is, you're insulting me by texting. You'll do a formal proposal and we will follow the process. And so there are age elements to that. I would never suggest that everybody is in their age box and that's it. But there are age elements to that, or generational elements to that.
Brian, this has been great. I mean, this is really good, practical data. Hey, how do people get that free gift of the 10?
So what I wanted to share was the top 10 techniques that procurement uses against sellers. It's based on our research, attending their conferences, listening to their podcasts, all of these things coming together. And we found 10 that we see all the time, sometimes 3, 4, 5 on the same phone call. And if you would like to email me, I'd be happy to send you a copy. It's the techniques and the beginning of how to overcome those techniques. So my email is bdoyle, so B like Brian, Doyle, Doyle, like my last name, at holdenadvisors.com. And just email me directly. I think maybe you're putting it in the chat. That's awesome. And then I also I post on this all the time on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, that'd be awesome too. So it's just Brian Doyle. I'm the CEO at Holden Advisors, just one of us. So that would be great. Love to interact with folks, answer questions, see what's going on in your world and see if I can help.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. I know we have Carson and Brandon. We have to run here pretty quick. So Carson, wrap us up.
Brian, you just got a LinkedIn invite from me. Thank you for this. You got me all fired up. And thanks all for our audience for being a part of today's show. This was an exciting one and a very unique one. So hopefully we can get you back again soon. And for everyone who joined us, thank you. And until next time, happy modern selling.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
you guys. Thanks for having me.